The file folder sits in a climate-controlled vault, 3 stories beneath the Central Intelligence Agency headquarters in Langley, Virginia. It is marked with a single word in faded red ink: Phantom. Inside that folder is a photograph. 47 military trucks, 217 American soldiers, all lined up in a muddy staging area in eastern France. The date stamp reads August 14th, 1944. 24 hours later, every single one of them vanished without a trace. No wreckage, no bodies, no blood, nothing. The United States Army searched for 6 weeks. The Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a case file that remained active until 1953. The Central Intelligence Agency, barely 4 years old at the time, assigned 3 operatives to track down what happened. Their final report, declassified in 2003, with 70% of its contents redacted, contains a single haunting sentence. Evidence suggests Operation Phantom Fuel involved parties whose interests transcended national allegiance. What does that mean? Who makes trucks full of gasoline disappear? And more importantly, why? This is not the story you learned in history class. This is not the sanitized version where brave soldiers landed on beaches, marched across Europe, and defeated evil. This is the story of the invisible war. The war fought not with rifles and tanks, but with fuel drums and manifests, and men who understood that controlling the flow of gasoline meant controlling the outcome of battles that would never be named in textbooks. This is the story of how one mechanic from Detroit stumbled into a conspiracy that reached from the motor companies of Michigan to the highest levels of military intelligence. A conspiracy so dangerous that speaking about it could get you erased from history. And how, on the night of August 15th, 1944, he made a choice that changed everything. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Because to understand what happened that night, you need to understand what happened the night before. You need to understand the Ghost Convoy. Captain Arthur Sterling kept immaculate records. It was his defining characteristic. Every requisition form filed in triplicate. Every supply manifest cross-referenced. Every vehicle movement logged down to the minute. On the evening of August 13th, 1944, Sterling authorized a fuel convoy to depart his forward logistics base near the Belgian border. 47 GMC CCKW trucks, each carrying 5 55-gallon drums of high-octane aviation fuel. Destination: 3rd Army forward positions approximately 80 kilometers east. The convoy commander was Lieutenant Robert Chen, a Stanford graduate who spoke fluent French and German. His second-in-command was Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, a veteran of the North Africa campaign who had survived Kasserine Pass and knew more about desert warfare than most officers knew about their own wives. These were not inexperienced soldiers. These were professionals. At 2100 hours, the convoy departed. Sterling watched them roll out into the rain. He returned to his tent, noted the departure time in his log, and went to sleep. They never arrived. By 0600 the next morning, 3rd Army Forward Command was screaming into Sterling's radio. Where was the fuel? Patton's armored divisions were stalled. Tanks were running on fumes. Did Sterling understand that men were going to die because his convoy had not shown up? Sterling did not understand. His convoy had left on time. The route was secure. It was a straight shot down a road the engineers had already cleared. What could possibly have gone wrong? He sent out search patrols. They found nothing. He contacted every checkpoint along the route. No one had seen the convoy. He even radioed German prisoners of war, thinking maybe there had been an ambush the Allies had not detected. The Germans seemed genuinely confused. They had launched no operations in that sector. 47 trucks do not just vanish. 217 men do not evaporate into the rain. Something had happened, something impossible. The tire tracks left the main road about 30 kilometers from the depot. The search teams followed them into the forest. The tracks went deep, weaving between trees, circling back on themselves as if the drivers had been lost or confused. And then, in a clearing about 8 kilometers off the main route, the tracks simply stopped. The ground was torn up, churned into mud by heavy vehicles. But there were no trucks, no fuel drums, no bodies, no shell casings, no blood. It was as if the entire convoy had been lifted straight up into the sky. The official explanation, the one that went into Sterling's after-action report, was that the convoy had been ambushed by a German special operations unit and the wreckage removed to conceal the attack. But Sterling did not believe it. He had seen German ambushes. They left evidence. They left bodies. They left something. This was different. This was surgical. This was planned. And in the maintenance shed behind Sterling's command tent, leaning against the corrugated metal wall with a cigarette in his scarred hand, Technical Sergeant Jack Sullivan had heard every word of the search briefings. He had seen the maps. He had noted the location where the tracks ended. And he had noticed something nobody else seemed to care about. The fuel manifest did not match the departure log. Sterling's paperwork said 47 trucks, each carrying 5 drums, 235 drums total. But the fuel depot's inventory log showed 250 drums signed out that night, 15 drums unaccounted for, 15 drums that, according to the official record, never existed. Jack stubbed out his cigarette in the mud. He was a 40-year-old mechanic who had spent 20 years tightening bolts on an assembly line in Detroit. He was not trained in intelligence work. He was not a detective, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Someone was stealing fuel, and someone had just made an entire convoy disappear to cover their tracks. Hey, before we go any further, I want to say thank you for watching. If you are enjoying this story, if you want to know what really happened to that convoy and how deep this conspiracy goes, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because this story has layers we are just starting to peel back. Trust me, you do not want to miss where this goes. All right, back to 1944. The next morning, Jack walked into Sterling's tent without knocking. Sterling looked up from his paperwork, annoyed at the interruption. He saw a grease-stained sergeant with oil under his fingernails and assumed this was some mundane maintenance issue. He had no idea he was looking at the man who was about to unravel everything. Jack dropped a manila folder on Sterling's desk. Inside were fuel requisition forms, inventory logs, and a handwritten chart that showed 15 drums of gasoline that existed in the physical world but not on paper. Sterling stared at the documents for a long moment. Then he looked up at Jack with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite fear. It was something in between, something calculating. "Where did you get these? Does it matter?" Jack pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. 15 drums, 505 gallons of high-octane fuel, signed out the night of August 13th, but not listed on the convoy manifest. That fuel went somewhere, Captain, and I am guessing it did not go to Patton's tanks. Sterling closed the folder. His hands were very steady. Too steady. "Sergeant Sullivan, you are venturing into areas that are above your pay grade and beyond your understanding. I suggest you return to your duties and forget what you think you have found." "I would love to forget it," Jack said, "but there is a problem. Tomorrow night, you are sending me out with a fuel run, same route the Ghost Convoy took, and I would very much like to know if I am going to end up in a forest with no tire tracks leading out." Sterling stood up. He walked to the tent entrance, looked outside to make sure no one was listening, then pulled the canvas flap closed. When he turned back to Jack, his face had changed. The bureaucratic mask had fallen away. What remained was a man who looked tired and scared and very, very careful. "You need to understand something, Sullivan. This war is not what you think it is. Yes, we are fighting the Germans. Yes, we are trying to liberate Europe. But there is another war happening simultaneously. A war over resources, over markets, over who gets to control the reconstruction after the shooting stops." Jack lit a cigarette. "You are saying someone is playing both sides. I am saying there are people who view this conflict as a business opportunity. Oil, steel, rubber, chemicals. The same companies supplying our war effort are the same companies that supplied the German war machine before Pearl Harbor. Some of them never actually stopped. So, the Ghost Convoy?" Sterling sat back down. He suddenly looked much older than his 38 years. "I do not know for certain, but I have suspicions. There are certain individuals who have been pressuring me to authorize specific fuel shipments. Shipments that do not quite add up when you look at the final destinations. Shipments that sometimes require routing through areas that make no tactical sense." "The broker," Jack said. Sterling's head snapped up. "How do you know that name?" "I do not. Not really. But I heard 2 men talking last week. They did not know I was in the motor pool. They mentioned someone called the broker. They said a shipment needed to reach the Eastern Front by dawn or the deal was off. I did not think much of it at the time. Figured it was some intelligence operation. But now I am wondering." "You need to stop wondering," Sterling said quietly. "These people do not leave loose ends, Sullivan. The Ghost Convoy might have stumbled onto something they were not supposed to see. Or maybe they were deliberately eliminated because someone needed them gone. Either way, the same thing could happen to you. Jack studied the captain's face. There was something Sterling was not saying, something he wanted to say, but could not quite bring himself to speak out loud. "You are not just a logistics officer, are you?" Sterling hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper, "Economic intelligence. I am supposed to be tracking black market activity, monitoring supply chains for irregularities. But every time I find something, every time I submit a report, it gets buried. My superiors tell me to focus on keeping the trucks running and let the intelligence professionals handle the complicated matters. Except the intelligence professionals seem very uninterested in investigating certain leads, because they are in on it." "I did not say that. You did not have to." Sterling pulled out a bottle of scotch from his desk drawer. He poured 2 glasses without asking if Jack wanted one. They drank in silence for a moment. "There is something else," Sterling finally said. "Your truck. The Ford Gat you have been working on. That vehicle is not in the standard inventory. It showed up 3 weeks ago with transfer papers that do not quite track back to any depot I can verify. Someone wanted that specific truck at this specific base. And now someone wants you to use it for a fuel run. Does that not strike you as convenient?" Jack had been wondering about that himself. The Ford Gat was too perfect for the mission. Light enough to handle bad roads. Simple enough to modify. It was almost as if someone had selected it specifically for improvisation. "So what do I do? Refuse the mission?" "You cannot refuse. That would raise too many questions. But you can be careful. Document everything. If you see anything unusual, anything at all, you report it to me directly. Not through official channels. To me. And if I do not make it back?" Sterling refilled both glasses. "Then I will know for certain that we have a much bigger problem than missing fuel drums." Jack left the tent as the sun was setting. He walked through the depot, past rows of silent tanks and stacked ammunition crates, and soldiers who had no idea that the war they were fighting had layers they could not see. He thought about the Ghost Convoy, about Lieutenant Chen and Sergeant Torres and 215 other men whose families would never know what really happened to them. He thought about Lily, his daughter back in Detroit, 7 years old with a missing front tooth and a smile that made the entire world make sense. He had promised her he would come home. He had promised he would fix enough engines and tighten enough bolts to help end this war so he could walk back through that front door and pick her up and never let go. But now he was being pulled into something that had nothing to do with fighting Nazis and everything to do with men in expensive suits who saw death as a line item on a balance sheet. Jack reached the maintenance shed. Private Tommy Miller was already there, ostensibly inventorying spare parts, but probably just hiding from work detail. The kid looked up when Jack entered. "Sergeant, you okay? You look like you have seen a ghost." Jack almost laughed. "Maybe I have, kid. Maybe I have." He walked over to the Ford Gat, ran his hand along the dented fender. This ugly, unremarkable truck might be the key to everything. Or it might be a trap. Either way, tomorrow night he was going to find out. "Before we move on, I am curious. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. It is always wild to think about how this story from 1944 is reaching people all over the world at all different hours. Anyway, let us get back to what happened next, because this is where things get really strange. Tommy Miller was 19 years old, born on a farm outside Wichita, Kansas. That was what his service record said. That was what he told everyone. It was a good story. Simple, believable. The kind of background that made officers nod approvingly and never ask follow-up questions. It was also completely false. Tommy's real name was Thomas Millerton. His father was not a farmer. His father was Harold Millerton, vice president of Continental Oil Company, a man who had spent the 1930s negotiating contracts with IG Farben, the German chemical conglomerate that produced everything from synthetic rubber to Zyklon B. A man who had very quietly maintained those business relationships even after the war started. A man who, in the summer of 1942, had been visited by 2 representatives from the Office of Strategic Services, who explained that his son would be joining the military and that Harold would continue his German contacts, only now he would be working for the United States government whether he wanted to or not. Tommy had been 17 when the men came to his house. They did not ask him to spy, they told him. They gave him a new identity, put him through basic training, and assigned him to logistics units, where fuel and oil were constant topics of conversation. His mission was simple: watch, listen, and report anything unusual. For 2 years, Tommy had filed reports that went nowhere and documented nothing, until 3 weeks ago, when Technical Sergeant Jack Sullivan had started asking questions about inventory discrepancies. Until the Ghost Convoy disappeared. Until Tommy realized he was not the only person at this depot who was pretending to be someone else. He watched Jack examine the Ford Gat, running his hands over welds that Tommy himself had helped create. Jack thought Tommy was just an eager kid trying to be useful. He had no idea Tommy had been trained in vehicle modification by OSS Technical Services. He had no idea that every conversation they had was being memorized and transcribed into reports that Tommy sent via coded radio transmissions every 72 hours. And he had absolutely no idea that Tommy's last report had come back with new orders that made his hands shake when he decoded them. Maintain cover. Accompany subject on fuel run. Document all contacts. To prevent exposure of Operation Phantom Fuel by any means necessary. By any means necessary. Tommy knew what that meant. It meant if Jack got too close to the truth, if Jack threatened to expose something bigger than both of them, Tommy was authorized to make sure Jack never came back from that forest. He was authorized to kill the only person in this entire camp who had treated him like a human being instead of a glorified mechanic's assistant. Tommy turned away and pretended to organize wrenches. His stomach felt hollow. He had signed up for this because his father's sins needed atoning for, because stopping men like Harold Millerton from profiting off death seemed like the most important thing in the world. But now the people he worked for were asking him to become exactly the kind of person he had joined to fight against. The problem was, he still did not know what Operation Phantom Fuel actually was. His handlers told him it was classified above his clearance level. All he knew was that it involved fuel shipments, that it was connected to the Ghost Convoy disappearance, and that Jack Sullivan was dangerously close to discovering something that powerful people wanted to remain hidden. Jack stepped back from the Ford and wiped his hands on a rag. "Kid, tomorrow night we are going to take this beauty out for a very long, very dangerous drive. You sure you want to come along?" Tommy forced a smile. "Someone has to keep you out of trouble, Sergeant. Trouble seems to be all there is these days." Jack pulled out the photograph of his daughter. He did this sometimes, just stared at it like it was a talisman against everything wrong with the world. "You got family back home, Tommy?" "Not really." That part was true. Harold Millerton might be biologically his father, but Tommy had stopped considering him family the day he learned what the man had done. "Just me." "Well, stick close tomorrow night. If anything happens, if things go sideways, you get yourself out. Do not be a hero. Heroes get buried in unmarked graves, while the people who sent them there collect their pensions. You understand me?" Tommy nodded. He understood perfectly. Jack was trying to protect him. Jack, who had no idea that Tommy's entire identity was a lie. Jack, who had no idea that the kid he was trying to save might be the one holding a gun to his head before the night was over. "Get some sleep," Jack said. "Tomorrow we find out what happened to the Ghost Convoy, or we become part of it." After Jack left, Tommy sat alone in the maintenance shed. He pulled out a small notebook, the kind that looked like nothing more than a personal journal. But written in the margins, in a code that looked like random doodles, was everything he had observed about Jack Sullivan. Every conversation, every suspicion Jack had voiced, every question Jack had asked about fuel inventories and missing convoys and men called the broker. Tommy added a new entry. Subject aware of discrepancies. Suspect's conspiracy. Emotionally attached to mission due to family considerations. Assessment. Will not abandon investigation regardless of personal risk. Then he added something that was not in his training. Something his handlers had never taught him to include in reports. Subject deserves better than this. We all do. He closed the notebook. Outside, rain had started falling again. The same rain that had been falling the night the Ghost Convoy disappeared. Tommy wondered if they had known, those 217 men, that they were driving into something much bigger and darker than a simple ambush. He wondered if Lieutenant Chen, in those final moments, had understood what was really happening. He wondered if Jack would figure it out before it was too late, and if Jack did figure it out, what Tommy would do when his orders required him to silence the only decent person he had met in this entire miserable war. Somewhere in the night, a radio crackled to life in Sterling's tent. A coded message arrived, encrypted and urgent. Sterling decoded it with shaking hands. It was from his superiors in economic intelligence. They had been monitoring his communications. They knew he had spoken to Jack. They knew he had shared classified suspicions. The message was brief. Seize all unauthorized investigations. Sullivan Fuel Run proceeds as planned. No interference. You have been warned. Sterling burned the message. But the warning was clear. Whatever was happening tomorrow night, his superiors wanted it to happen. They wanted Jack to take that Ford Gat out into the darkness. They wanted him to follow the same route the Ghost Convoy had taken. The question was why? What was waiting in that forest? What had those 47 trucks discovered that required their complete erasure from existence? And more importantly, why did someone want Jack Sullivan to find it? The hidden compartment was not meant to be found. Jack discovered it by accident while reinforcing the truck bed at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, working by flashlight because sitting still meant thinking about tomorrow, and thinking about tomorrow meant acknowledging he might not have a day after that. His wrench slipped, clanged against what should have been solid metal, and produced a hollow echo that made him freeze. He tapped again, definitely hollow. He ran his fingers along the seam, found the concealed latch disguised as a bolt head, and twisted. A metal panel, no larger than a cigar box, dropped open. Inside was a leather document folder. United States government issue, the kind used for classified materials, and stamped across the front in faded red ink. Operation Phantom Fuel. Eyes only. Jack's hands went numb. He should have closed it. Should have pretended he never found it. Should have welded that compartment shut and driven this truck straight into a river. But his fingers were already opening the folder, and his eyes were already reading words that would have gotten him executed for treason if anyone knew he had seen them. The first document was a memo, dated June 7th, 1944, 1 month after D-Day. The header read, Office of Strategic Services, Economic Warfare Division. The author was someone named Alan Dulles, a name Jack did not recognize but whose signature carried the weight of someone very important and very dangerous. The memo outlined something called Protocol 13, a contingency plan for managing fuel distribution to combat units in the European theater. That sounded boring and bureaucratic until Jack reached paragraph 4, which explained that certain offensives would be deliberately starved of fuel at critical moments to prevent premature advances that might destabilize post-war economic planning. Jack read that sentence 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. They were intentionally running tanks dry. They were deliberately creating fuel shortages, not because of supply chain problems, not because of German attacks, but because someone had decided that winning too quickly would be economically disadvantageous. The second document was worse. It was a contract, a binding agreement between representatives of major American oil companies and a Swiss intermediary, identified only as Handel und Vermittlung AG, which Jack's limited German translated roughly as Trading and Mediation. Corporation. The contract specified fuel delivery schedules, prices in Swiss francs, and neutral territory exchange points. They were selling gasoline to the Germans, while American boys died in those tanks, while Patton screamed for fuel, while Jack himself had spent 20-hour days repairing engines so those tanks could move forward. Someone was selling the enemy the very fuel that could have saved Allied lives. The third document was a list of names, American officials, corporate executives, bank account numbers in Zurich and Lisbon, and at the bottom of the list, a notation, Ghost Convoy, liability eliminated per Protocol 13 subsection 7. Liability eliminated. 217 men were not killed by Germans. They were murdered by their own side because they had discovered this. Because Lieutenant Chen, or Sergeant Torres, or some nameless private, had seen something they should not have seen, had asked questions they should not have asked, and had become a threat to an operation that was making certain people extraordinarily wealthy, while soldiers died in the mud. Jack's vision blurred. His throat closed. He wanted to vomit, but his stomach was too empty, and his rage was too complete. He thought about every engine he had fixed, every truck he had kept running, every hour he had worked, believing he was helping to win a war. And all of it, every single moment, had been in service of men who viewed this entire conflict as nothing more than a profit center. A sound behind him made Jack spin around, instinctively hiding the documents behind his back. Tommy stood in the doorway of the shed, silhouetted by moonlight, his face unreadable. "How long have you been standing there?" Tommy did not answer immediately. He stepped into the shed, closed the door, and when he spoke, his voice was different. Older, harder. Long enough to know you found what you were never supposed to find. Jack's hand moved toward the wrench on the workbench. Not fast, just ready. Easy, Sergeant. I am not here to stop you. Tommy sat down on an overturned fuel drum, suddenly looking exhausted. My name is not Tommy Miller. I am with the Office of Strategic Services. I have been embedded in logistics units for 2 years, watching for exactly this kind of thing. Watching it happen or stopping it. I thought I was stopping it. Turns out I was just documenting it for people who already knew and did not care. Tommy pulled out a cigarette, noticed his hands were shaking, put it away. My orders for tomorrow night were to make sure you did not expose Operation Phantom Fuel, by any means necessary. You know what that means in OSS language? It means you were supposed to kill me. It means I was supposed to kill you, Tommy confirmed. Problem is, my father helped build this. My father sold out to IG Farben before the war. When OSS found out, they gave me a choice. Work for them or watch my father go to prison for treason. I chose to work for them because I thought I would be fighting the same kind of corruption my father represented. Instead, I have been protecting it. Jack pulled the documents back out. We need to get these to someone who will actually do something. A journalist, a congressman, someone. Everyone who matters already knows, Jack. That is the problem. This goes all the way up. The people who could stop it are the people benefiting from it. Then we go public. We make copies. We send them everywhere. And we will be dead before the first newspaper hits the street. These people made a convoy disappear. You think they cannot make 2 mechanics disappear? They sat in silence. Outside, the rain intensified. Somewhere, a generator coughed and died. In the darkness, Jack could barely see Tommy's face, but he could hear something in the kid's voice that had not been there before. Something that sounded like the last thin thread of hope about to snap. So what do we do? Jack finally asked. Tommy stood up, walked to the Ford Gat, put his hand on the hidden compartment. We go on that fuel run tomorrow. We deliver the gas to those tanks, and we make absolutely sure this truck and everything in it survives the trip, because maybe we cannot stop them, but we can make damn sure the evidence survives long enough for someone someday to make them pay. That is a terrible plan. You have a better one? Jack looked at the documents, at the names, at the proof that everything he believed about this war was a lie. Then he looked at the photograph of Lily, still tucked over his heart. Yeah, he said quietly. We survive. We get these documents home, and we make sure my daughter grows up in a world where people know the truth. The Ford Gat left the depot at 2100 hours, exactly as scheduled. Sterling watched from his tent, his face betraying nothing, but his hand gripped a coffee cup hard enough to crack the ceramic. He did not sleep that night. None of them did. What the official records would later show was a routine fuel delivery that encountered moderate enemy resistance and successfully resupplied forward armor units with minimal casualties. 1 killed in action. Mission accomplished. What actually happened requires us to understand something about the geography of eastern France in August 1944. The official route ran northeast along a road the engineers had designated Red 7. It was the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that every military manual and tactical doctrine said you should make. Jack turned south instead. Sergeant, this is not the route, Tommy said, gripping the door handle as the Ford bounced over rough terrain. I know. Jack's eyes never left the road. The Ghost Convoy followed Red 7. I am not making that mistake. They drove through darkness so complete it felt like drowning. No headlights. Jack navigated by moonlight and memory, and the kind of mechanical intuition you develop after 20 years of knowing how vehicles respond to different terrain. The Ford handled it better than it should have, almost like it had been designed for exactly this kind of improvisation. At 2300 hours, they crossed into the sector where the Ghost Convoy's tire tracks had vanished. Jack slowed, but did not stop. Through the trees on their left, barely visible, were lights, not campfires, electric lights. Generator-powered illumination in the middle of supposedly contested territory. You seeing this? Tommy whispered. Jack nodded. They kept driving, but now both of them were watching those lights, watching as they resolved into a clearing, watching as the clearing revealed something that should not exist. It was a truck depot, a fully operational logistics staging area complete with fuel pumps, maintenance facilities, and at least 30 vehicles. Half of them were American GMC trucks. The other half were German Opel Blitz transports, and they were parked side by side, being serviced by men in uniforms from both armies, working together like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sweet Jesus, Tommy breathed. A sign at the entrance, visible in the generator lights, read, Neutral Economic Zone, Authorized Personnel, Only, and beneath it, in smaller letters, Geneva Convention Article 23 Compliance Area. Jack pulled the Ford to a stop behind a line of trees, killed the engine. They sat there, watching. American soldiers handing off fuel drums to Wehrmacht personnel, German mechanics helping repair a U.S. Army Jeep, an officer in British uniform sharing cigarettes with someone wearing an SS insignia. All of it happening with the casual efficiency of a business transaction. This is what happened to them, Jack said quietly. The Ghost Convoy saw this, and they could not let that information get out. A figure emerged from the largest building, and even from a distance, even in the uncertain light, there was something about the way he moved that suggested authority. He was tall, well-dressed, wearing civilian clothes that looked absurdly out of place in a war zone. He consulted with an American officer, shook hands with a German officer, and then walked to a Mercedes staff car that had no business being this far behind Allied lines. That is him, Tommy said. That is the broker. They watched the Mercedes drive away into the darkness, heading east, toward German lines. Probably the same route it had taken hundreds of times before, carrying contracts and cash and the evidence of a conspiracy so vast that entire convoys could be erased to protect it. Jack started the engine. We have seen enough. We are still going to deliver the fuel. Those tank crews did not create this. They are just trying to survive. We deliver the fuel. But first, we document everything. Tommy pulled out a small camera from his jacket. OSS issue, designed for covert photography. He had been carrying it for 2 years, taking pictures of nothing important, sending them to handlers who filed them away and forgot about them. Tonight, for the first time, he was going to photograph something that mattered. They spent 15 minutes circling the perimeter of the neutral zone, Tommy shooting roll after roll of film while Jack kept the Ford in shadow. The images would be grainy, taken from distance, but they would be enough to prove what was happening. Enough to show that the war everyone thought they were fighting was just the surface layer of something much darker. A shout in German made them both freeze. Someone had spotted them. Flashlight beams swept through the trees. Jack slammed the accelerator, and the Ford leaped forward with surprising speed for a truck carrying half a ton of gasoline. Behind them, gunfire erupted. Not military fire, not the careful, aimed shots of trained soldiers. This was panic shooting, wild and desperate. The sound of people trying to protect a secret worth more than any individual life. Bullets punched through the wooden cargo bed. One shattered the passenger mirror. Another hit the fuel drum closest to the cab, and Jack heard the metallic ping that meant the drum had been compromised. Gasoline began to leak, trickling down into the truck bed, and suddenly they were not just a target. They were a bomb waiting for the right spark. "We are leaking," Tommy shouted over the engine noise. "I know." Jack yanked the wheel, throwing the Ford into a slide that took them off the road entirely. They crashed through underbrush, branches scraping the windshield, the suspension screaming in protest. Behind them, headlights appeared. 2 vehicles in pursuit, maybe 3. Jack had spent his entire adult life understanding how machines moved, how weight transferred, how engines responded, how to push a vehicle exactly to its limits without crossing the line into catastrophic failure. The Ford was not designed for this. It was designed to haul potatoes from farm to market, but Jack drove it like it was a racing car, like every turn was calculated, and every shift perfectly timed, because the alternative was stopping, and stopping meant dying, and dying meant Lily would never know what her father had discovered. They burst out of the trees onto a dirt road. Jack recognized it. This was the eastern approach to the tank positions. They were close, maybe 2 kilometers. The pursuers were still behind them, but the Ford had a lead now. Enough of a lead, maybe. Tommy reloaded his rifle. "If they catch us before we reach our lines." "They will not," Jack said. And then, ahead in the darkness, a voice shouted in English, "Halt! Identify! American checkpoint." They had made it. The pursuing vehicles skidded to a stop, reversed, disappeared, back into the forest. They could not risk coming within range of Allied positions. could not risk questions about why they were chasing an American supply truck. Jack eased the Ford through the checkpoint, showed his credentials, and drove the last kilometer to where 3 Sherman tanks sat silent in the darkness, their crews waiting for fuel they had been promised 6 hours ago. Sergeant Kowalski emerged from Big Mama, looking like he had aged a decade since Jack last saw him. "Sullivan, tell me you brought the good stuff." Jack climbed out of the Ford, smelling gasoline, feeling his hands shake with adrenaline crash. "Got your juice, Sergeant, but we need to talk, because what I am about to tell you is going to change everything you think you know about this war." They refueled Big Mama first, then the other 2 Shermans, working fast because dawn was coming, and with it the chance that someone would realize Jack and Tommy had survived. Kowalski and his crew helped pump the fuel, while Jack explained everything. The documents, the neutral zone, the broker, Protocol 13. When he finished, nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Kowalski lit a cigarette with hands that were not quite steady. "So we have been fighting with one arm tied behind our backs this whole time. On purpose. Not the men on the ground," Jack said. "The men making decisions 3 levels above us. And the Ghost Convoy? Saw what we saw. Had to be eliminated." Kowalski looked at his tank, at his crew, at the other tanks now fueled and ready to move. "What happens when we report this?" "We do not report it," Tommy said. "Not through official channels. Those channels are compromised. We make copies of everything, hide them in different places. Some on the tanks, some in gear that is going back to the States, some with soldiers rotating home. We scatter the evidence so they cannot destroy it all. And then we wait. Maybe it takes months, maybe years, but eventually someone will find one of these copies, a historian, a journalist, someone who will ask the right questions. It was not a satisfying plan. It was not heroic. It did not involve dramatic confrontations or justice served. It was the desperate last-ditch effort of men who understood they were too small to fight the system directly, but too stubborn to let the truth die completely. They spent the next hour making copies of Jack's documents using a portable photostat machine the tank crews carried for copying maps. They sealed the copies in waterproof bags and hid them in the most unlikely places they could think of. Inside the false bottom of an ammunition crate, welded into the hollow frame of a stretcher, rolled into the handle of an entrenching tool, even tucked into the personal effects of a soldier who had died 2 days earlier and whose body was being shipped home for burial. As the sun began to rise, Tommy handed his OSS camera to Kowalski. "Make sure this gets to the rear echelon. Tell them it is just personal photos from some dead soldier. They will develop it without looking too closely. Those negatives are evidence." "What about you?" Kowalski asked. "You are coming back with us, right?" Tommy and Jack exchanged a look. They both knew the answer before anyone said it. "We go back, we get arrested," Jack said. "Sterling warned me. His superiors know something is wrong. They will separate us, interrogate us, make us disappear the same way they made the Ghost Convoy disappear. So what is your play?" Jack pulled out the photograph of Lily one last time, looked at her gap-toothed smile. "We run. Tommy knows people. Underground railroad stuff from his OSS work. We make it to Spain, then Portugal, then home. Might take months, but we get home." "Desertion," Kowalski said flatly. "They will shoot you if they catch you." "They will shoot us anyway if we stay," Tommy pointed out. "At least this way we have a chance." The sound of engines interrupted them. A jeep was approaching fast from the direction of the depot. Sterling was driving, alone, and when he skidded to a stop, his face was pale. "You need to leave. Now. I just got orders to detain you both, pending investigation into unauthorized deviation from assigned route and suspected theft of classified materials. They know you found something. I bought you maybe 20 minutes by saying I needed to coordinate with forward command first." Jack started to thank him, but Sterling cut him off. "Do not thank me. I should have done more, should have fought harder. But I was scared, and I was weak, and I let it happen." He handed Jack an envelope. "Travel papers. They are forgeries, but they will hold up to casual inspection. And this." He handed over a thick bundle of cash. "French francs, Swiss francs, enough to get you to neutral territory. Captain, I am putting in my report that you were killed by enemy action during the fuel run. Miller died trying to save you. Heroic. Tragic. I will make sure your daughter gets your personal effects and your benefits. It is the least I can do." Jack wanted to argue, but there was no time. He and Tommy grabbed what little they could carry, split the remaining fuel drums among the tanks, and climbed into the Ford one last time. The bullet-riddled, leaking, beautiful machine that had carried them through everything. Sterling saluted. A real salute, not the perfunctory gesture officers gave mechanics. Godspeed, Sergeant Sullivan, and I am sorry. For all of it. The Ford lurched away toward the south, toward roads that would take them away from the front, away from the army, away from everything except the slim hope that they could survive long enough to see their gamble pay off. Behind them, Kowalski watched until they disappeared, then turned to his crew. Get Big Mama ready to move. We have got a war to finish. And when it is over, when we go home, we tell everyone we can about what really happened here. Not the official version, the truth. History, as it turned out, would forget Jack Sullivan and Tommy Miller. The Ford Gat would be listed as destroyed in action. The fuel run would become a footnote in the records of the Third Army's advance across France. And Protocol 13 would remain classified for another 60 years, hidden under layers of redaction and bureaucratic denial. But the documents survived. Scattered across a dozen hiding places, protected by soldiers who understood that some things mattered more than orders. And slowly, piece by piece, over decades, the truth began to emerge, not all at once, not dramatically, but persistent, inevitable, because Jack Sullivan had made a promise to his daughter that she would grow up in a world where the truth mattered. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is make sure the truth survives long enough to find someone brave enough to speak it. If this story got you thinking about the hidden histories we have never been told, about the conspiracies that were not theories but documented facts, then hit that subscribe button. There are more stories like this. More secrets that took decades to surface. And if you want to be here when we uncover the next one, make sure you have got notifications turned on. Until then, keep questioning, keep digging, and remember that history is written by the people who survive to tell it.